Good morning, I'm Rabbi Elton from the Great Synagogue, and welcome to our Tuesday learning. We're in Sefer Hachinuch, the book about the Mitzvot, the commandments and their meanings, and we're going to look at a very important mitzvah from Parashat Re'eh, which we're going to read this coming Shabbat, which seems to conflict with a lot of what we know about the way Judaism works in practice these days. This is mitzvah number 454, and is Shelo Lahosif Al Mitzvot Torah, not to add to the mitzvot, to the laws of the Torah. That seems strange because we know there are lots of mitzvot which we practice these days which are not part of the original Torah. For example, Hanukkah, which was created by the rabbis after the story took place in 165 BCE, or Purim, which happened in Persia a little time before that, but is also a creation of the rabbis, not from the Torah, but recorded in the book of Esther in a later part of the Bible. Or how about muktzah, and not moving an object like a pen on Shabbat, which you can't use for Shabbat. The Torah says you can't write, but it was later added that you can't even move a pen on Shabbat. So how do these prohibitions fit in with this original prohibition of Baal Tosef, of not adding the Torah? Let's have a look. Shebnimnau Shelo nosif b'Torah, we are held back that we shouldn't add to the Torah, Shebechtav, the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, but lo b'Torah sheba'al peh, and not also the oral Torah. So not everything which was originally commanded to Moses on Mount Sinai and in the desert is in the 5 books of Moses. Some is also in the oral tradition given to him at the same time. For example, there's no specific mention in the Torah, as it's written, of shechita, of the laws for slaughtering an animal so you can eat it in accordance with the laws of kashrut. But those laws are not later laws, they were given to Moses orally and passed down as part of the oral tradition. And so shechita is not an addition, it's actually the same age, the same antiquity as the laws written in the Torah itself. So we're talking about adding to those laws, additional laws created later. Ve'al ne'emar, and about this it said, Lo so safe alav, do not add to it. Ukeitad yeh hatosefes, and what is this sort of addition? Kasav HaRambam, Zichrono Livracha, the Rambam, Maimonides, one of the Sefer Hachinuch's most important influences, says this: Gegon hamoreh shebasar oaf b'chalav asor min haTorah. If somebody were to teach that it is forbidden to eat the flesh of a chicken with milk, and that it's forbidden by the Torah itself, v'zeh mosif al davar hakabbalah, this would be to add to the received tradition. Shekach kibalnu b'perush lo svashel kediv v'gomer, because when we read in the Torah, do not cook a kid in the milk of its mother. Shebasar behema v'chaya nesru levashel b'chalav. This only forbids the cooking of a domesticated or a wild animal. For example, cooking the meat of a cow, cooking beef, or cooking deer, venison, with milk. But the flesh of a chicken is never prohibited by the Torah. And also, if you were to say that the flesh of a wild animal like a deer is in fact permitted in milk, over mishum lo sigra, this would transgress another prohibition, lo tigra, do not diminish from the Torah. Lefisha ze goreahu, because this is a diminution. Because what we know is only the flesh of domesticated and wild animals that produce milk are included in the prohibition of eating milk and meat together. So notice that very important distinction which the Chinuch has quoted from the Rambam. The problem is not prohibiting chicken and milk. In fact, the rabbis did prohibit chicken and milk. They did so in order that we shouldn't get confused and start having meat and milk. The problem would be to teach that such is a commandment to the Torah. The problem is not an additional prohibition created by the rabbis. The rabbis are entitled to make additional prohibitions in order to protect the Torah, a concept known as a siag Torah, a fence around the Torah. They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to say, don't move a pen on Shabbat lest you come to use it. That's not prohibited. What is prohibited is to say, the Torah says you can't move a pen, or the Torah says you can't eat chicken and milk. That would be a distortion of the Torah, and that can be a distortion in a additional or distortion in a subtracting way. Either you distort it by saying the Torah prohibited things which it did not, or you can say the Torah permitted things which it did not. Either way, these are a distortion of what the Torah originally said. So the Chinuch continues. V'rubei hamafarshim yomru, delo shach lo so safe klal elabim mitzvah saseh. This prohibition on not adding only applies, according to many of the commentators, to a positive commandment. Ve'inyanhu lefi ma sheshamati ani mipi mori yishmero el. And he said, I learned this from his teacher, may God protect him. To go, somebody who decides to wear not one pair of tefillin, but two pairs of tefillin, two on the head and two on the arm. Or instead of having 4 compartments in the tefillin, they have 5 compartments. They add in that way. Or instead of taking 1 lulav on Sukkot, they take instead 2. And anything along these lines. Or somebody who sits in the sukkah when it's not Sukkot anymore, with the intention of fulfilling the mitzvah. There's no mitzvah to sit in a sukkah in the middle of Cheshvan, but they decided to do so to fill the mitzvah. That would also be Baal Tosef. That's adding to the mitzvot. And they did so afal pi she'odea she'avar zmana. They did so even knowing that the time had passed. She'ein ovrim mishum Baal Tosef ella she'mechaven lasos ha-mitzvah. You only transgress Baal Tosef when you intend to do a mitzvah. So you can pick up 5 lulavim if you like. That's no problem with that. In fact, you might well do so in order to carry them around. There's no prohibition on simply picking up several sets of the 4 species. It's when you're doing it in order to fulfill the mitzvah. That's when you're adding to the mitzvot, and that's when it's prohibited. V'chein hu b'gemara Rosh Hashanah, and he also then quotes a passage in the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah, u'masik hasam, where it's concluded there, Ella Amar Rava, but Rava says, L'seis lo bai kavana. In fact, you don't need intention all the time. Kloma shemitzvos ein tzrichin kavana, because mitzvahs do not need intention. Lavo bismano lo bai kavana. If you do it in its proper time, then in fact you would have done something wrong. So let's say according to Rava, let's say if you were to want to carry around several sets of Arba Minim, you couldn't do so. Several sets of the 4 species, because if it's Sukkot time, then you don't need to have intention to fill the mitzvah. You could carry around 5 or 6 sets of the 4 species when it's the Tuesday after Sukkot finishes, that's fine. But on Sukkot itself, Rava himself would not have carried around multiple sets. He would have made sure he only took 1 set at a time, because otherwise he would be breaching, in his view, the prohibition of not adding to the Torah. That's a stringency which I think we do not hold by these days, because no one has ever said to me, make sure you only carry 1 set of 4 species at a time. Okay, but there is a condition, or a tweak, as it were, to this prohibition. There's a detail which is important. We've said you can't do a mitzvah with a greater number of the objects at one time. If it says take 1 lulav, take 1 lulav, it says put on 1 box on your arm, 1 box on your head for tefillin, do that. Don't add to it in that way. However, you can fulfill the mitzvah many times sequentially. That's not Baal Tosef. You're doing the mitzvah as it was prescribed to be done. You're just doing it several times. That's not Baal Tosef. Baal Tosef is adding to the mitzvah, adding to its nature, adding to the means by which it is performed, not performing it in the right way several times. So, for example, Hanotel lulav b'chag afilu mea pamim. Let's say you took the right number of the 4 species, but you did it 100 times biyom each day. Ardas l'seis b'chol pam pam, and you want to fulfill the mitzvah each and every time you did so. Ein kan Baal Tosef. There's no adding to the mitzvot here. V'china tokeh b'shofar Rosh Hashanah v'afilu kama pamim. And even if you were to hear the shofar or blow the shofar many, many times on Rosh Hashanah, v'chein kol hayosef, anything like that, there is no prohibition there at all. And in fact, that's what we do. So somebody might blow shofar in one minyan, and then go and blow shofar in the old age home or blow shofar in the hospital they've not transgressed Baal Tosef because they're not doing it in a improper way. They're just doing it several times. Misharsha mitzvah, the roots or the underlying idea of the mitzvah. Ki hadon ha-mitzaveh osanu ala Torah baruch hu, that God who commanded us in the Torah, b'tachlis hashlemus, he has there's a perfection and a completeness to the Torah which he gave. V'chol ma'asav v'chol tzivuyav heim shleimim b'tovim, and all of his commandments are perfect and good. V'atosefes b'hem chisaron, and if you add to them, you're already taking away. If you have something which is perfect and you add to it, you actually diminish it. You make it worse by adding more. More is less. V'chol shekein ha-geira'on, and of course if you take away, that's obviously the case as well. V'zeh davar baruch hu, and this is a clear matter. So this is the prohibition. This is still applicable today. This applies in all places and all times, to both men and women. And if you transgress it and you do add to the mitzvah in this way, the going, for example, you make a tetas tefillin which has not 4 boxes but 5 boxes. Or you put 2 boxes on your head instead of just one. You take 2 lulaves in your hand. Anything like that. Or you sit in a sukkah after Yom Tov has gone out. Or you take a lulav 2 weeks after Sukkot is finished with the intention of performing the mitzvah. Over al lavzeh v'chayev malchus, you have transgressed the prohibition and you get lashes for that. Although you need to have both witnesses and warning beforehand in order to be punished in that way. So just like any other of this class of prohibitions, you get lashes if you transgress, but you need to be witnessed, and the witnesses need to warn you beforehand, because this is about protecting the integrity of the Torah. It's not about what you do necessarily, because you can do it several times, and you can do new things or be withheld from doing things because the rabbis think it's sensible. It's about protecting the integrity of the Torah and the Masorah. We have to know the true tradition of what we received and be able to distinguish between what was part of the original revelation to Moses and what is a later addition by the rabbis, which have good reasons but should not be confused or conflated with the original revelation. That has to be preserved and understood in its original and pristine form. Everyone have a good day, a good week, and looking forward to learning with you next week. All the best.